Before we dive into today's story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Here we reveal the untold side of fame. The keys that dangled from my belt would become my weapon against death itself on the morning the world collapsed around me. 20 years I'd carried them through the marble corridors of Tower 1. 20 years of opening doors and checking locks. Never knowing that one day, these simple pieces of metal would be the difference between dozens of people living or dying in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. My name is William Rodríguez, and I was about to discover what it truly means to hold someone's life in your hands. That Tuesday morning in September started like any other, but there was something in the air, a tension I couldn't name, like the moment before a thunderstorm when even the birds fall silent. I arrived at 6:30 a.m., an hour before my shift, because punctuality wasn't just a habit for me. It was a promise. In Puerto Rico, where I was born, my mother always said, "Mijo, your word is your bond, and your work is your prayer." Those words had guided me through 2 decades as a maintenance supervisor, but I had no idea they were about to be tested in ways I never imagined. I wasn't just another maintenance worker. I was a key holder, one of only 5 people in the entire World Trade Center complex who possessed a master key. That key could open every single door in the North Tower, from the deepest basement levels to the executive floors on the 106th floor. Bathrooms, offices, storage rooms, mechanical areas, emergency exits. Nothing was beyond my reach. In my hands, that key wasn't just metal. It was responsibility for every soul who worked in this steel giant that stretched toward the heavens. The security guard at the front desk, Marcus, waved as I passed through the lobby. "Morning, William. Yankees lost again last night." "Don't remind me." I laughed, but my mind was already shifting into work mode. Today's agenda included checking air conditioning units on the 95th floor and investigating a complaint about a stuck door in the basement levels. Routine work, but in a building that housed 40,000 people on busy days, nothing was ever truly routine. The elevator carried me down to my domain. The basement levels where most people never ventured to subbasements B4, B5, and B6 were a labyrinth of corridors, mechanical rooms, and storage areas that kept the World Trade Center alive. This was where the building's heart beat, pumps humming their steady rhythm, generators providing backup power, air circulation systems breathing life into offices hundreds of feet above. I found peace in these forgotten spaces, in the honest work of keeping the machinery that sustained thousands of lives running smoothly. I was in mechanical room B4, adjusting a pressure valve when the world exploded. The sound came from somewhere impossibly far above, a deep, thunderous boom that seemed to tear through the very foundation of reality. The entire building swayed like a tree caught in a hurricane, and I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. My hands shot out instinctively, gripping the concrete wall as the tower groaned in protest, steel and concrete crying out under forces they were never designed to withstand. What the hell? The lights died instantly. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was already racing through possibilities. 20 years of experience kicked in. I'd lived through the 1993 bombing, minor earthquakes, power failures. This was different. This was catastrophic. I grabbed my radio, tried to reach security. Nothing but static. The building's communication system was down, which meant whatever had happened was massive enough to cripple our infrastructure. Then I heard the screaming. I followed the sound through corridors that suddenly felt foreign in the red emergency light, past familiar equipment that now seemed like monuments to a world that had just ended. The screaming led me to Felipe David, a maintenance worker who'd been refueling a freight elevator in the subbasement. Felipe was on the ground, and even in the dim light, I could see that he was badly burned. His clothes were charred, his skin blistered and raw, his eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from witnessing something beyond human comprehension. "Felipe, what happened?" I knelt beside him, my hands hovering over his injuries, afraid to cause more pain. "Fire," he gasped, his voice barely human. "Explosion. Like hell itself opened up, William." Fire came down the elevator shaft like a dragon breathing flame. From above, everything burning so hot. I thought I was going to die. That's when the truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a basement accident. Something catastrophic had happened in the upper floors, something powerful enough to send fire and destruction cascading down through the building's elevator shafts, through its very bones. I helped Felipe to his feet, supporting his weight as we moved toward the stairwell. Every step was agony for him, but he never complained. We were cut from the same cloth. Men who endured, who pushed through pain because others depended on us. "We're getting you out of here," I told him, but as we reached the stairwell, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "William," he whispered, "there are others down here, in the other rooms. The morning crew." My blood turned to ice. Of course. Tuesday morning meant a full maintenance team spread across the basement levels. Electricians, plumbers, engineers. Men working alone in isolated rooms, possibly trapped, possibly dying while I stood here, safe in the stairwell. I had seconds to make a choice that would define not just the rest of my life, but potentially the rest of several other lives. I could get Felipe to safety as quickly as possible, or I could go back into that maze of smoke and darkness to search for survivors. Felipe needed immediate medical attention, but those other men might not have anyone else coming for them. "Listen to me," I said, helping Felipe start up the stairs. "I'm going to get you started toward the lobby, but then I have to go back." "No, William. Too dangerous. Something terrible has happened up there. That's exactly why I have to go back." I touched the master key hanging from my belt. My talisman, my burden, my responsibility. I'm the only one who can open all the doors down there. If they're trapped behind locked barriers. I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. I supported Felipe through the first flights of stairs, the concrete seeming solid enough despite the vibrations that continued to pulse through the building like the heartbeat of something dying. With each step upward, I became more convinced that time was our enemy. "Keep going," I told Felipe at the next landing. "Follow the emergency lights to the lobby. Tell them William Rodríguez went back for the others." "You're insane," Felipe said, but there was admiration mixed with the fear in his voice. "Maybe," I replied, "but I can't live knowing I left them behind when I had the keys to save them." I turned away from safety and headed back into the basement, my master key ready, my heart pounding but my purpose crystal clear. Behind me, Felipe's labored breathing faded as he climbed toward the world above. Ahead of me lay corridors filled with smoke, darkness, and unknown terrors. In mechanical room B6, I found Jose, an electrician who'd been working on a control panel when the disaster struck. He was unconscious but breathing, his tools scattered around him like shrapnel. I lifted him onto my shoulder, grateful for 20 years of physical labor that had kept me strong, and began the journey back to the stairwell. Each step was a battle, not just against Jose's weight, but against the building itself. The floor tilted at strange angles, walls groaned ominously, and that constant vibration was growing stronger, like the building was slowly tearing itself apart. When I reached the stairwell with Jose, I encountered something that would burn itself into my memory forever. People were streaming down from the upper floors, dozens, then hundreds of them. Office workers in business suits, security guards, maintenance staff, all of them marked by shock and terror, their faces streaked with soot and disbelief. "There's been an attack," someone shouted as they rushed past. "A plane hit the building." A plane. The words made no sense. How could a plane hit the World Trade Center? We were talking about one of the tallest structures in the world in the heart of Manhattan. Planes didn't just accidentally fly into skyscrapers. But as I looked at the faces streaming past me, faces that had witnessed something unimaginable, I understood. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had turned an airplane into a weapon and aimed it at the place where thousands of innocent people were simply trying to earn a living. The full implications crashed over me. If a plane had struck the upper floors, the people above the impact zone might be trapped. Stairwells could be blocked. Elevators were certainly destroyed. And here I was, one of only 5 people in the building with a master key, one of the few who knew every escape route, every alternative passage, every hidden way out of this steel labyrinth. I helped Jose join the evacuation flow, making sure other hands took over his care. Then I made a decision that even now, I'm not sure was heroic or simply insane. I started climbing up, against the river of humanity flowing down towards safety, against every survival instinct screaming at me to run. I climbed. "Sir, you're going the wrong way," a woman in a torn business suit called out. "The building's been attacked. You need to evacuate." "I know," I shouted back over the chaos of hundreds of feet on concrete and the growing symphony of sirens from the world outside. "But there are people up there who might be trapped. I have the keys." I held up my master key like a badge of office, like proof that I belonged going up when everyone else was coming down. Because somewhere above me, possibly dozens of floors above the carnage, there were people who might be locked behind doors they couldn't open, in storage rooms or bathrooms or mechanical areas that would become their tombs without help. The climb became harder with each floor. The evacuation stream grew thicker, more desperate, more panicked. I pressed myself against walls to let people pass, but I never stopped climbing. My legs burned, my lungs ached from smoke that was getting thicker, and my ears rang from the constant symphony of alarms and human voices echoing off concrete. But I kept climbing because I was William Rodríguez, and I had the keys. And while everyone else was running down to save their lives, I was climbing up, not knowing if I would ever see sunlight again, but knowing I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. The higher I climbed, the more the buildings seemed to be dying around me. By the 15th floor, the stream of evacuees had become a torrent of terror. People stumbling, crying, some carrying others who couldn't walk on their own. The concrete walls were hot to the touch, and I could smell something it never encountered before, the acrid stench of a skyscraper burning from the inside out. "Sir, please." A firefighter in full gear grabbed my arm as I tried to push past him. "You can't go up there. We have reports of structural damage above the 70th floor." I looked into his eyes through the mask. Young, maybe 25, probably with a wife and kids waiting at home. He was risking his life to save others, just like me. But he didn't understand what it carried. "I'm William Rodríguez," I said, showing him my master key. "Maintenance supervisor. I know every inch off this building, and I have keys to areas your men can't access. There might be people trapped behind locked doors." The firefighter studied my face for a moment, then nodded grimly. "Stay close to the walls. And if we tell you to get out, you get out." I nodded, but we both knew I was lying. The 20th floor brought new horrors. Emergency lighting was failing, leaving us in near-total darkness except for the firefighters' flashlights. The air was thick with smoke and something else, a fine dust that coated everything and made breathing feel like swallowing sandpaper. I started using my key at every landing, checking bathrooms, storage closets, any space where someone might be trapped. Most were empty, but on the 23rd floor, I found them. 3 women huddled in a supply closet, too terrified to come out. Please don't hurt us," one whispered when I opened the door. She was maybe 30, her business suit torn, her face streaked with tears and soot. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm William, building maintenance. I'm here to get you out." I knelt to their level, speaking as calmly as I could despite the chaos around us. "What are your names?" "Sarah," the first woman said. "This is Jennifer and Lisa." We were in the bathroom when everything started shaking. We heard explosions, screaming. We were too scared to leave. "You did the right thing staying together. But now we need to get you to the stairwell. Hold hands, stay close to me, and don't let go." Leading them into the evacuation flow was like pushing through a nightmare. The stairwell was packed with desperate people, many injured, all of them fighting to survive. But even in hell, I saw strangers carrying strangers, sharing water, offering encouragement. Humanity showing its best face in the worst moment. "There," I told the women as we joined the downward flow. "Follow this crowd. They'll take you to safety." "What about you?" Sarah asked, grabbing my arm. "I'm going back up. There are more people." "You're crazy," she said, but then she kissed my cheek. "Thank you for not leaving us." I watched them disappear into the river of evacuees, then turned back to my climb. Each floor was getting worse. The smoke thicker, the heat more intense, the building's death rattle growing louder. Steel groaning, concrete cracking, and worst of all, distant screams from somewhere far above. On the 31st floor, I encountered Officer David Lim, someone I'd worked with for years. He was setting up a command post, trying to coordinate the evacuation while his radio crackled with desperate reports. "Rodríguez," he called out. "What the hell are you doing up here?" "My job. I'm checking locked areas for survivors. The whole upper section is compromised. We've got reports the impact zone starts around the 93rd floor. Everything above that might be inaccessible." 93rd floor. That meant there were still 60 floors between me and the impact zone. 60 floors where people might be trapped. The mathematics hit me like a physical blow. If there were even a few people per floor who needed help, I was talking about potentially hundreds of lives. "I have to keep going up," I said. "William, listen to me." David grabbed my shoulders. "The building is not stable. We don't know how long it's going to hold. Every minute you spend up there might be your last." I looked at my master key, then back at David. "If I don't go up, who will? You have protocols, procedures that I could go places you can't, open doors you can't access." David stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "God help you, William." I resumed climbing, but now the building itself was fighting me. By the 40th floor, the stairwell swayed noticeably with each step. Concrete steps were cracked, and I could see daylight streaming through gaps in the exterior wall, gaps that hadn't been there an hour ago. On the 42nd floor, I found John, a security guard I'd known for 15 years. He was sitting on a landing, blood running down his face, staring at nothing with a vacant look of severe shock. "John, it's William. Can you hear me?" He looked up slowly, his eyes struggling to focus. "William? What's happening?" I was in the elevator when everything went crazy. The car dropped 3 floors. I had to pry the doors apart with my bare hands. I knelt beside him, examining his head wound. "John, we need to get you downstairs. Can you walk?" "I think so." He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on me. "But William, you should know. I was on the 78th floor when it happened. I saw the plane. My blood went cold. You saw it. Commercial airliner, full of jet fuel. It came through the building like we were made of paper." His voice was hollow, distant. The explosion. The fireball rolled through entire floors in seconds. Anyone who was up there when it happened. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I helped John join the evacuation flow, making sure other people would help him reach safety. But his words kept echoing as I continued climbing. A commercial airliner, full of jet fuel. The fireball consuming floors in seconds. How many people had been killed instantly? How many were still alive up there, trapped above an inferno? I paused at the 50th floor landing, my legs burning, my lungs aching from the increasingly toxic air. For the first time since I'd started this climb, doubt crept in. John's testimony painted a picture of destruction so complete, so overwhelming, that maybe there was no one left to save above the impact zone. Maybe I was climbing toward my own death for nothing. I thought about my mother back in Puerto Rico, about the co-workers who depended on me, about Sarah and Jennifer and Lisa, who were hopefully safe by now, because I'd had a key that could open their prison door. I could turn around. I could go back down to safety. I'd already saved lives. No one would blame me. But then I heard it again, that faint voice calling for help from somewhere far above, carried down through the building's twisted steel skeleton. Someone was alive up there. Someone was waiting. I tightened my grip on the master key and kept climbing. The 60th floor was where the real heat began. Walls so hot I couldn't touch them. Air that shimmered like summer asphalt. The 70th floor brought the smell of jet fuel, sharp and chemical, mixed with smoke that made my eyes stream tears. By the 75th floor, I was climbing into hell itself. The smoke was so thick I could barely see my hands. The building swayed so violently I had to stop every few steps to keep from falling. But worst was the sound, a deep, continuous roar from the soul of the building as it fought against forces tearing it apart. 3 floors from the impact zone. 3 floors from discovering whether there was any way to reach the people trapped above the fire. My master key felt heavier with each step, weighted with the responsibility off everyone, counting on someone to come for them. As I climbed those final steps toward the zone where hell had been unleashed, I realized I might be the only person left who could open the doors between the trapped and their freedom, or between the trapped and their final moments. 3 floors from hell, I tightened my grip on the key, and I kept climbing. The 78th floor was where I first truly understood what hell looked like. The stairwell door opened onto devastation so complete that my mind initially refused to process it. What had once been an ordinary office floor, desks, computers, family photos pinned to cubicle walls, was now a twisted landscape of molten metal and burning debris. The ceiling had collapsed, exposing the concrete skeleton above, where flames licked through gaps like the building was being devoured from within. But it was the silence that struck me most. After hours of climbing through chaos and human voices, this floor was eerily quiet except for the roar of fire and the groaning of tortured steel. The absence of human presence was more terrifying than any scream. I pulled my shirt over my nose and mouth, trying to filter the toxic air, and stepped across debris that crunched like broken glass. The heat was unbearable, like standing too close to an open furnace, but I had to know. I had to see if the stairwell continued upward. The answer came as I rounded the corner. A wall of twisted steel and concrete blocked the passage completely. The airplane hadn't just damaged the building. It had severed the stairwell like a knife cutting through bone. No one was going up this way. More importantly, no one trapped above could come down this way. "Dear God," I whispered, but then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A sound so faint, I almost missed it over the fire shore. A voice. A human voice, calling for help. I followed the sound deeper into the hellscape, using my flashlight to navigate around obstacles that had once been office furniture. The voice was getting stronger, more desperate. "Here. Someone please. I'm here." I found her trapped under a section of collapsed ceiling in what had been a conference room. A woman, maybe 40, her legs pinned beneath concrete debris. Her face was streaked with blood and soot, but her eyes were alert, fighting. "Ma'am, my name is William. I'm going to get you out." I knelt beside her, assessing the situation. The debris was heavy, but not immovable. "What's your name?" "Anne." "And Kershaw. I work for Cantor Fitzgerald. We were in our morning meeting when—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Cantor Fitzgerald. Upper floors. If and was here on 78, she'd been trying to evacuate when a collapse trapped her, which meant there might be others, people who'd been making their way down when the building structure failed." I braced my feet and began working to lift the concrete slab pinning her legs. The debris was heavier than it looked, and the heat was sapping my strength, but I could feel it starting to shift. "And when I lift this, you need to pull your legs out." "Can you do that?" "I'll try." I took a deep breath and lifted with everything I had. The concrete moved 6 inches, enough, and cried out as feeling returned to her legs, but she managed to pull herself free. "Can you stand?" She tried, winced, tried again. "My ankle's twisted, but I can walk." I helped her toward the stairwell, but as we reached the doorway, she grabbed my arm. "William, there are others." When a plane hit, people from upper floors started coming down. Some got trapped when the ceiling collapsed. I heard voices before I passed out. More people, trapped in this inferno. Every instinct told me to get out immediately, to get both Ophis back to the relative safety of the stairwell. But I couldn't leave knowing others might be buried under debris, slowly dying while I escaped. "I need to get you to the stairwell first, then I'm coming back." "No." Her voice was firm despite her injuries. "I know this floor. I worked here for 3 years. If there are people trapped, I can help you find them faster." I wanted to argue, but she was right. This maze of destruction would take me hours to search alone. With her knowledge of the layout, we could work efficiently. "All right, but if I tell you to get out, you get out." We spent 20 minutes searching the ruins of the 78th floor, calling out, listening for responses, using my flashlight and master key to check accessible spaces. The heat was getting worse, flames beginning to spread from above. We were working against time, against fire, against the building's growing instability. We found 3 more people, 2 men and a woman, all office workers caught in the collapse while trying to evacuate. One had a broken arm, another severe burns, the third was unconscious from smoke inhalation. None should have survived much longer in this environment. Getting them to the stairwell was like conducting a medical evacuation in a war zone. The floor was becoming more unstable by the minute, and I could hear new sounds, steel beams failing under stress, debris shifting as the building's structure adjusted to catastrophic damage. As I helped the last injured person into the stairwell, I encountered organized groups of firefighters and emergency personnel climbing past us, heading toward the upper floors. "Where are you going?" I asked a firefighter who paused to help with our evacuees. "Command post on 19. We're trying to coordinate rescue efforts for people trapped above the impact zone. The main stairwell is completely blocked at 78. His face went grim. "We're working on it. Maybe service elevators in the core are still functional. But the structural damage..." He shook his head. "We don't know how long the building can hold." As and the other injured evacuees began their descent with the emergency personnel, I faced another impossible choice. I could go down with them, help ensure they made it to safety, knowing I'd own everything reasonably possible. Or I could continue up, past the blocked stairwell, and try to find another way to reach the people trapped above the fire. The decision was made by a voice echoing from somewhere above, faint, desperate, but unmistakably human. "Help! Can anyone hear me? Please, someone help us." And heard it too, looking up from the stairwell. "That's coming from the 80th floor, maybe 81st. There must be another way up." I thought about the building's layout, the service corridors and freight elevators that most people never knew existed. There was a chance, small but real, that I could access the upper floors through routes not blocked by the main impact damage. And, "You need to get out of here now. What about you?" I looked up toward that desperate voice, then back at her. "I'm going to find another way up." That's suicide. Even if firefighters are saying the building might not hold. Maybe, but I can't live knowing I didn't try. Those people up there, they're counting on someone to come for them. Right now, I might be the only one with the keys to reach them. I left, and with the emergency personnel, and continued climbing. But now I was looking for something different. Access to the building's service core, where freight elevators might still function. On the 80th floor, I found it, a service door marked authorized personnel only. My master key opened it easily, revealing a narrow corridor that led to the building's central core. The air here was smoky but breathable, and I could see elevator doors ahead. The freight elevator control panel was damaged but functional. I pressed the call button and waited, listening to mechanical sounds somewhere in the darkness above. After what felt like an eternity, doors opened with a grinding groan. The elevator car was damaged, one wall buckled, emergency lighting flickering, but it was intact. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the 91st floor, just below the main impact zone. As the elevator began to rise, I felt the building swaying more violently than ever. Through gaps in the shaft walls, I could see flames and smoke, and the elevator's mechanical sounds were punctuated by steel groaning under stress. I was climbing into the heart of the disaster, toward floors where no rescue personnel had reached, where people had been trapped for hours without hope. My master key had gotten me this far, but I had no idea what I would find when those doors opened. The elevator shuddered to a halt, and the doors opened onto a scene that defied comprehension. The 91st floor was intact, but transformed. Air thick with smoke and dust, furniture thrown around like toys, and through broken windows I could see Manhattan from an angle that looked wrong, as if the building itself was tilting. But there were people here, dozens of them, crowded near the windows, some waving pieces of cloth, trying to signal rescue helicopters that circled far below. When they heard the elevator doors open, they turned toward me. I saw hope flood into faces that had given up expecting rescue. They turned toward me, faces lit with a hope they thought would never come. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't climbing into hell alone anymore. "I'm William Rodríguez, building maintenance." I called out to the dozens of faces staring at me in disbelief. "I'm here to get you out." A businessman in a torn suit stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank God. We've been trapped here for over 3 hours. The stairwells are blocked. The elevators are down. We thought, wet hot, no one was coming. How many people are up here? On this floor, maybe 40. But there are people above us, too. We can hear them calling sometimes. And the floor below us, the 90th, there's a group there that includes some badly injured people. My mind raced. The freight elevator could handle maybe 15 people at a time, and I had no idea how much longer it would remain functional. 40 people on this floor, more on the 90th, voices from above. We were talking about potentially hundreds of souls trapped in vertical prison cells, with me as their only connection to life. Listen to me, I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear over the constant groaning of tortured steel. The freight elevator is still working, but I don't know for how long. We need to organize, move efficiently, get as many people down as possible. A former military man named Robert stepped forward. I can help coordinate the evacuation. Good. Get a count of everyone, identify the injured. I need to check the freight elevator capacity and see if I can reach the other floors. As Robert began organizing people into groups, I returned to the elevator and examined the control panel more carefully. The mechanical systems were clearly stressed, cables stretching under load, pulleys grinding against damaged bearings. But it was designed for heavy equipment, which meant it could handle 15 or 20 people if necessary. I pressed the button for the 90th floor. The elevator descended one level and opened onto devastation worse than anything I'd seen. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, and several people were trapped under debris. Others were injured, some unconscious. But they were alive, and when they saw him, relief flooded their eyes like light breaking through darkness. "Help is here," someone whispered, and the words spread like a prayer answered. I spent 20 minutes on the 90th floor, using my strength and master key to free people trapped under debris, opening storage areas where some had taken shelter, assessing injuries. 23 people on this floor, including several who couldn't walk without assistance. Back on 91, Robert had the evacuees organized. 38 people here, 3 with serious injuries, 5 more with minor injuries. First group, all the injured plus helpers. 12 people maximum. I looked around at faces that had become my responsibility. When you get to the 20th floor, find emergency personnel and tell them exactly what's happening. Tell them William Rodríguez has found a way to reach the upper floors, but the freight elevator is the only way out. As the first group crowded into the damaged elevator car, I saw fear and hope warring in their expressions. They were trusting their lives to a damaged elevator in a catastrophically damaged building, trusting my judgment that this rickety system would carry them back to the world of the living. "See you down there," I told them as the doors closed. The elevator began its descent, and I listened to cables and machinery, praying the systems would hold. The building continued to sway, and through broken windows, I could see smoke pouring from floors above and below us. While waiting for the elevator to return, I tried my radio again. Finally, I got through. "This is William Rodríguez, building maintenance supervisor. I'm on the 91st floor of the North Tower with approximately 60 survivors. I found a functioning freight elevator." The response crackled with static. "William, this is Fire Department Command. Did you say 91st floor? We have no personnel above the 80th floor." "That's correct. I found an alternate route through service corridors. The freight elevator is still operational, but I don't know for how long." "William, you need to evacuate immediately. We have structural engineers saying the building's stability is critically compromised. It may not hold much longer." I looked around at the people still waiting for rescue. Robert's organized groups, the injured from the 90th floor, faces that had gone from despair to hope, because I'd appeared with a key that could unlock their survival. "Understood, but I'm not leaving until everyone is out." The freight elevator returned empty, proof the first group had made it safely. The relief was overwhelming, validation that this desperate plan could work. Second group, 12 people. "Stay calm, stay together." As the second group loaded, Robert pulled me aside. "William, we've been hearing voices from the floors above. We don't know how many people or what condition they're in. After we get everyone from these floors evacuated, I'm going up to check. That's insane. You heard the fire department. The building might collapse. Maybe it won't. And if there are people up there who die because I didn't try to reach them, how do I live with that? Robert studied my face, then nodded. You're not going alone. When we get everyone out, I'm coming with you. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You saved our lives, William. The least I can do is help you save others. The evacuation continued, group by group. Each time the elevator returned empty, I felt relief mixed with growing urgency. More people were safe, but I could feel the building's condition deteriorating. The swaying was getting worse, the structural sounds more ominous, the heat intensifying. By the time we'd evacuated everyone from the 90th and 91st floors, over an hour had passed that 73 people who'd been trapped above the impact zone were now safely evacuated. People who would have died without the freight elevator, without the master key, without the decision to climb up instead of down. But voices from above continued calling out, faint but persistent, reminding us our work wasn't finished. Ready? I asked Robert as we stood alone on the 91st floor. Ready. I pressed the button for the 95th floor. The elevator began to climb toward floors where no rescue personnel had reached, where people had been trapped for hours in conditions getting worse by the minute. But when the doors opened on 95, we encountered something that changed everything. The floor was completely destroyed. Not just damaged, obliterated. The airplane's impact had been so violent, the fires so intense, that entire sections of the floor had simply ceased to exist. There were gaping holes where offices used to be, twisted steel beams jutting out at impossible angles, and through the destruction, I could see straight through to the floors above and below. Jesus Christ, Robert whispered. But even here, in this landscape of absolute destruction, we heard them. Voices. Human voices calling for help from somewhere in the wreckage. Hello, I shouted into the devastation. Can you hear me? This is William Rodríguez. I'm here to help. Here. We're here. The voice came from somewhere to our left, from what might have been a section off-floor that had partially collapsed but hadn't completely given way. I looked at Robert. We need to find them. William, this floor is not stable. Look around. There's nothing holding this section up except prayer and luck. He was right. The floor was a death trap, ready to collapse completely at any moment. Walking out on Toit would be suicide. But those voices, they were so close. Maybe 20 feet away. Maybe less. There, Robert pointed. I can see movement over there, behind that collapsed wall section. I could see it too. Shadows moving, hands waving desperately through a gap in the debris. People were alive over there, trapped but alive. All I had to do was find a way to reach them. I tested the floor with my foot. The concrete felt solid enough near the elevator, but I could see cracks spreading outward like spider webs, and every few seconds the entire section would shift slightly as the building swayed. William, no. Robert grabbed my arm. You can't. The floor won't hold. Maybe it will. And maybe it won't. And then you're dead, and they're still trapped, and no one else is coming for any office. I stared at the gap in the debris where I could see hands still waving, where human beings were counting on someone to save them. My master key felt heavier than ever, weighted with the responsibility of every life I might be able to save, and every life I might lose if I made the wrong choice. That's when I heard it, a sound that cut through every other noise in the building. A deep, fundamental groan that seemed to come from the very foundation of the tower. Not just the normal sounds of atom-aged building, but something different, something final. The building's coming down, Robert said, his voice barely audible. William, the whole building is coming down. I looked at the people trapped in the debris 20 feet away, then at Robert, then at the elevator behind us, our only way out of this death trap. Through the broken windows, I could see helicopters circling, but they were too far away to help. Emergency crews were dozens of floors below us, but they couldn't reach us in time. For the first time since I'd started this journey, I faced a choice that had no right answer. If I tried to reach the trapped people, I would almost certainly die, and Robert would die, and the people in the debris might die anyway when the floor collapsed. But if I didn't try, if I chose to save myself and Robert, those people would definitely die, and I would have to live forever knowing I'd abandoned them when I had the keys to their freedom. The building groaned again, longer and deeper this time. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. "William," Robert said urgently. "We need to go. Now." I took one step toward the elevator, then stopped. Through the gap in the debris, I could see faces now. 3 people, maybe 4, looking directly at me with expressions I will never forget. Not anger, not accusation, but understanding. They knew what choice I was facing. They knew what it meant. "Go," one of them called out across the 20 feet of unstable floor. "Go save yourselves. Tell our families we're thinking of them." The building groaned a third time, and this time I felt it in my bones. The entire structure was approaching catastrophic failure. We had maybe minutes, maybe less. I made my choice. I ran toward them. The floor cracked and shifted with every step, but it held. Barely, but it held. Robert was shouting behind, but I couldn't stop. These people had spent hours believing they were going to die alone in the sky, and I was not going to let that happen. Not when I had come this far. Not when I had the keys. I reached the debris pile and looked through the gap. 4 people, 2 men, 2 women, all of them injured, all of them beyond exhausted, but still alive. "Can you move?" I asked. "Sarah's leg is broken," one of the men said. "But the rest of us can walk if you can get us out of here." I started pulling debris away from the gap, using my master key like a crowbar, using my hands, using everything I had. The building was swaying violently now, and I could hear Robert screaming at me, "Tow, hurry." The gap widened. One person squeezed through, then another. The third person, Sarah with the broken leg, needed help, but we got her through. The fourth person was almost out when I heard the sound that meant our time was up. Not groaning this time, not creaking or shifting. A sharp, final crack that seemed to split the air itself. The floor's giving way. Robert shouted from the elevator. "William, move." I grabbed the last person and we ran. Not walked, not hurried, but ran in a full sprint across a floor that was collapsing beneath our feet. Behind us, I could hear concrete and steel falling into the void, the sound of a skyscraper eating itself. We reached the elevator just as the section of floor we'd been standing on moments before disappeared completely, leaving nothing but empty space and falling debris. All 6 of us crowded into the freight elevator, Robert, myself, and the 4 people I'd pulled from the wreckage. The elevator car was overloaded, groaning under the weight, but the doors closed and we began to descend. "Is everyone all right?" I asked, though I could barely hear my own voice over the building's death throes. Sarah, the woman with the broken leg, reached out and touched my arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not leaving us." As we descended through the damaged building, past floors filled with smoke and destruction, past the remains of what had once been one of the most magnificent structures ever built, I realized that I'd found the answer to the impossible choice. Sometimes there is no right decision. Sometimes you just have to choose to be the person who doesn't leave others behind, even when staying means risking everything. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the 20th floor, and the doors opened onto a crowd of firefighters and emergency personnel who had been waiting for us. As they helped us out of the elevator car, I heard one of them radio to his commander. "We've got them. William Rodríguez and 6 survivors from the upper floors. They're all alive." But even as we were led toward the stairwell in safety, I could hear the building above us coming apart. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard before, the death cry of a giant. I got them out. All of them. The people from the basement, the women in the supply closet, John the security guard, and from the 78th floor, the dozens of office workers from the 91st and 90th floors, and finally these 4 souls from the wreckage of the 95th floor. But as we hurried down the stairwell toward the world outside, I knew that my journey as the last man out was just beginning. Because somewhere above us, the building that had been my second home for 20 years was about to fall, and everything I thought I knew about courage, about duty, about what it meant to be a hero, was about to be tested one final time. The world I stepped into when we finally reached the ground floor was not the world I'd left that morning. The marble lobby that had been my daily gateway for 20 years was gone, replaced by something from the depths of hell itself. Glass covered everything like a carpet of deadly diamonds. Water cascaded from broken pipes, mixing with blood and debris to create rivers of destruction flowing across what had once been polished floors. The air was thick with dust, so fine it felt like breathing concrete powder, and the sound, dear God, the sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just noise. It was the symphony of civilization collapsing. Glass continuing to fall from impossible heights, steel beams groaning as they twisted beyond their design limits. And underneath it all, the worst sound of all, human voices calling for help from directions I couldn't identify, echoing off surfaces that were no longer where they should be. Move! 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 A firefighter grabbed my arm as we emerged from the stairwell. The building isn't stable. We need to get everyone as far away as possible. I looked back at the people I'd brought down with me. Sarah with her broken leg being carried by 2 emergency workers, Robert supporting one of the men we'd pulled from the wreckage, all of them covered in dust and soot but alive. Alive because we'd made it down those flights of stairs, because the freight elevator had held together just long enough, because sometimes miracles happen even in hell. But as we stumbled through the destroyed lobby toward what had once been the main entrance, I realized that our escape from the building was not an escape from the nightmare. We were stepping into the epicenter of something unprecedented in human history. The street outside was an alien landscape. What had been normal Manhattan morning traffic was now a scene of apocalyptic devastation. Cars were crushed under debris that had fallen from impossible heights. Emergency vehicles were everywhere. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, but they looked tiny and inadequate against the scale of destruction surrounding us. And the dust. There was so much dust in the air that I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. That it wasn't like fog or smoke. It was thick, choking, alive with particles of everything that had once been interior of the World Trade Center. Desk chairs and computers, ceiling tiles and carpet, documents containing years of human work and dreams. All of it pulverized into a gray cloud that coated every surface and filled every lung. Sir, this way. An EMT was trying to guide our group toward a triage area that had been set up in the street, but I couldn't move. I stood there in that gray wasteland, staring up at the building I'd just escaped from, and I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The North Tower was dying before my eyes. I could see floors collapsing in sequence, starting from somewhere near where we'd been just minutes before. What had been solid offices and conference rooms and break areas where people had shared coffee and talked about their weekends was now falling into itself with the inevitability of gravity. The building that had been my second home, the place where I'd carried my keys and my pride for 20 years, was becoming a cascade of destruction that defied comprehension. William, Robert grabbed my shoulder. We need to move. They're saying the collapse radius could extend for blocks. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the sight of something I'd never imagined possible. A skyscraper committing suicide, taking with it everyone and everything that couldn't escape in time. Somewhere in that collapsing tower were spaces I knew by heart. Mechanical rooms where I'd work alone for hours, offices where I'd chatted with people whose names I knew, stairwells where I'd walked thousands off times, carrying my keys and my responsibility. And people. There had to still be people in there, people we hadn't reached, people who'd been trapped in areas I couldn't access, people who'd run out of time. William, come on. Robert was pulling me now, along with an emergency worker who'd appear beside us. The whole thing is coming down. That's when I heard it. Not the sounds of destruction, not the chaos of the street, not the sirens and shouts of emergency personnel. I heard voices, human voices, calling from inside the collapsing building. Voices of people who were still alive in there, still hoping someone would come for them, still believing that help was on the way. I took a step back toward the building. No! Robert tackled me, literally throwing me to the ground as a shower of debris landed exactly where I'd been standing. William, they're gone. Everyone who's still in there is gone. You can't save them. I have the keys, I said, struggling to get back to my feet. I have the keys to every door in that building. The building is gone, William. The keys don't matter anymore. But they did matter. They mattered more than anything, because those keys represented every person who trusted that someone would come for them when they needed help. Every office worker who assumed that if something went wrong, the maintenance staff would know how to get them out. Every visitor who'd believe that this building was safe because people like me knew every corner of it. I was the last man out, but I wasn't the last man who should have gotten out. The final collapse, when it came, was like watching the end of the world in slow motion. The entire structure, 110 floors of steel and concrete and human ambition, folded in on itself with a sound that eiffled in my bones rather than heard with my ears. It was the sound of gravity winning, of engineering reaching its absolute limit, of thousands of tons of building material obeying physics in the most terrifying way possible. And then there was silence. Not the absence of sound, but a different kind of silence. The silence that comes after something unthinkable has happened, when the human mind needs a moment to process what it's witnessed. The silence of a city holding its breath. That silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then came the dust cloud. It rolled toward us like a living thing. A gray tsunami of pulverized building material, office furniture, and things I didn't want to think about. Everything that had once been the North Tower was now a cloud of particles racing through the streets of Manhattan at highway speed. "Run!" someone screamed, but there was nowhere to run. The dust cloud was faster than we were, more extensive than we could escape. So we did what humans do when faced with the impossible. We found whatever shelter we could, and we held on to each other. I remember Robert pulling me into the entrance of a building across the street. I remember the world going completely dark as the dust cloud engulfed us. I remember the taste of concrete powder and the feeling that I was breathing the remains of everything I'd spent 20 years maintaining and protecting. But mostly I remember the voices. Even as the dust cloud passed over us, even as we crouched in that doorway waiting for the world to end, I could still hear them. The voices of people who'd been calling for help from inside the collapsing tower. People whose names I'd never know, whose faces I'd never see, but whose final moments I would carry with me forever. When the dust finally settled enough for us to see again, the Manhattan I'd known my entire adult life was gone. In its place was something post-apocalyptic, a gray wasteland where familiar landmarks had been erased and replaced by piles of debris that rose like small mountains. Emergency workers moved through the devastation like ghosts, their faces covered with masks, their voices muffled by the enormity of what they were trying to comprehend. "Sir, you need medical attention." An EMT was trying to examine me, but I kept looking back toward where the building had been, where there should have been a familiar skyline reaching toward heaven. There was now just empty space and falling dust. "I'm fine," I told him, though I wasn't fine. I would never be fine again. "You've been exposed to a massive amount of debris and toxic dust. You need to be checked out." "There are people still in there," I said, pointing toward the pile of destruction that had once been my workplace. Under all that debris, people who were still alive when the building came down. The EMT followed my gaze, then looked back at me with eyes that held more compassion than I'd served. "Sir, I'm sorry. No one could have survived that collapse. You and the people you brought out, you were the lucky ones." Lucky ones. The phrase echoed in my mind as they led me to an ambulance, as they checked my vital signs and cleaned dust from wounds I didn't remember receiving. Lucky ones. As if surviving was just a matter of good fortune rather than 20 years of knowing every door, every stairwell, every possible way out of a building that had seemed permanent and safe. As if the master key I still carried in my pocket was just a piece of metal rather than a symbol of every life I'd been able to save and every life I hadn't. Hours later, after the medical examinations and the interviews with emergency officials and the phone calls to family members who needed to know I was alive, I found myself standing on a street corner in Lower Manhattan, looking toward where the World Trade Center had been that morning. The dust had settled enough to reveal the true scale of the destruction, and what I saw was a wound in the earth that would never fully heal. But I also saw something else. I saw emergency workers still searching through the debris, still hoping to find survivors, still believing that someone might be alive under all that wreckage. I saw ordinary people helping each other, sharing water and medical supplies, offering comfort to strangers who'd lost everything. I saw humanity responding to unthinkable tragedy with unthinkable kindness. Robert found me standing there as the sun was setting over a changed world. William, they want to interview you. The media, the authorities. They're calling you a hero. They want to know how you saved all those people. I looked at him, this man who'd risked his own life to help me rescue others. This stranger who'd become me a brother in the space of a few hours. I'm not a hero, Robert. Heroes don't leave people behind. You didn't leave anyone behind. You saved everyone you could possibly save. But not everyone. No, he said quietly. Not everyone. But the people you did save, Sarah with her broken leg, and from a 78th floor, those women from the supply closet, all the people from the upper floors, they're alive because you made choices that no one should ever have to make. They're alive because you went up when everyone else was coming down. I touched the master key in my pocket, feeling its familiar weight. For 20 years, it had opened doors for me. Today, it had opened doors between life and death, between despair and hope, between being trapped and being free. The voices, I said. I can still hear the voices of the people we couldn't reach. I know, Robert said. I hear them too. But I also hear the voices of the people we did reach. And those voices are saying thank you in ways we'll probably never fully understand. As we walked away from the site where the World Trade Center had stood that morning, I realized that being the last man out didn't end when you stepped onto the street. It didn't end when the building collapsed, or when the dust settled, or when the media interviews were over. Being the last man out meant carrying the weight of every decision you made, every door you opened, every person you saved, and every person you couldn't save. It meant understanding that sometimes the keys you carry aren't just to physical doors, but to the places in human hearts where hope lives, where courage is born, where ordinary people discover they're capable of extraordinary things. I was William Rodríguez, and I had been the last man out of the North Tower. But more than that, I was Amon who'd learned that heroes aren't people who aren't afraid. Heroes are people who are terrified, but who keep climbing anyway, who keep using their keys to open doors for others, who keep believing that every life matters enough to risk everything to save it. The voices I heard that day, both the ones calling for help and the ones saying thank you, would stay with me forever. They were the sound of humanity at its most vulnerable and its most courageous, the sound of people discovering what they're truly made of when everything else is stripped away. And in the end, that sound, the sound of human beings refusing to give up on each other, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, even if I was the only one left who could still hear it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.